Last week, I went to the Amundsen, and I saw the musical Parade by American Jewish musical theater composer Jason Robert Brown, who I'm a big fan of. I'm a big fan of some of his other musicals, and I hadn't seen Parade before, and I wasn't familiar with the music, but I knew a little bit about the story. You might know a little bit about the story or have seen the musical, or maybe you didn't, so I just want to share a little bit about it. So Parade is based on the true story of Leo Frank, a Jewish manager of a pencil factory in Georgia who is falsely accused in 1913 of the murder of 13-year-old Mary Fagan. At the start of Frank's trial in the musical, a character based on the real Georgian politician Tom Watson sings the question, "Who's going to swing the hammer of justice?" Watson is looking for justice for Mary Fagan, but what we see unfold in the musical is what happened in real early 20th century America, which is a grave miscarriage of justice for both Mary Fagan and for Leo Frank. The false accusation was clearly connected to early 20th century American Southern anti-Semitism, and the ADL was actually formed in the wake of Frank's contentious conviction, which sentenced Frank to death. So Frank and his lawyers are unable to change anything with the appeals they filed, and so we see in the musical Leo Frank's wife Lucille convince the governor of Georgia to investigate further, and upon reviewing the evidence, or lack thereof, beyond a general communal dislike of the Jews, Governor Slayton commutes Frank's sentence from death to life imprisonment, and this is in 1915. So he doesn't change the guilty verdict, but he does change the sentencing away from the death penalty to life in prison. And just by doing that, this essentially ends Governor Slayton's political career in the real story. And this started to make me think about how we experience justice in the face of power. Governor Slayton, who was not Jewish, was in a position of power, and he loses his power in pursuit of actual justice for Leo Frank and for Mary Fagan. And because the whole community was so intent on Frank's death, in reaction to this change in sentencing, an armed mob kidnaps Leo Frank from the prison, and they lynch him. He was 31. And in the musical, the character of Leo Frank, based on the real Leo Frank, dies with the words of Shema on his lips, sung to a heart-wrenching melody of Shema. And that's essentially how the musical ends. And it's, I would say spoiler alert, but the musical has left LA now, so sorry if you missed it. Now at least you know how the musical ends. Now, just to get us all up to speed on what's happened in the real-life Georgia since then, in 1986, Georgia issued a pardon for Frank in recognition of the state's failures, including failing to protect Frank from being murdered by a mob and failing to preserve his opportunity to appeal his case. But Georgia at that point took no stance on Frank's guilt or innocence. In 2019, more recently, Frank's case was reopened to examine whether it should be completely readjudicated and look back at that guilty verdict, and that investigation is ongoing. Clearly, issues of justice are aplenty in the case of Leo Frank. Now, we all know as Jews how important justice is in our tradition. As it says in the Torah, tzedek, tzedek, tirdof, justice, justice, you shall pursue. And so when I see a story like this, and when I really get to know on a deeper level this kind of story that happened in our American Jewish history, I've been sitting all week with the question of justice and how do we know we're pursuing justice, that we're on the right path of pursuing justice. And of course, as a rabbi, where else can I turn but the Torah? And luckily enough, this week's Torah reading, we have Parshat Pinchas, where we get two strong examples of how our ancestors pursued justice. And we also get God's response to both, and that reveals whether these pursuits of justice are on the godly path or on a good path or on a right path, or whether maybe we should try another way to pursue justice. So I'll start with the story of Pinchas, for whom the Parsha is named. So to get a little bit of understanding about Pinchas' story, we have to go to the end of last week's portion. And at the end of last week's parsha, Pinchas sees his fellow Israelite men being seduced by women outside of the Israelite people into worshiping another god, a false god, a god different from Adonai, our one God. And last week's Torah portion ends with the following episode. And it's an uncomfortable one, just as the Leo Frank story is an uncomfortable story. So what happens is an Israelite man brings a Midianite woman to his companions in the sight of Moses and of the whole Israelite community, who were weeping at the entrance of the holy tent of meeting, weeping over this turn towards this false god amongst their people. And Pinchas sees this Israelite man and Midianite woman, and he leaves the assembly of weeping Israelites, and he takes a spear in his hand. As the Israelite man and Midianite woman go inside the holy tent of meeting, the portable sanctuary that's filled with Adonai's presence, to do something completely not appropriate for that place, Pinchas follows them into the chamber and takes the spear and kills them both. Two things happen as a result of Pinchas taking this action, an action that he sees as justice, into his own hands. Last week's Torah portion ends by telling us that the plague God had sent to the Israelites for worshiping a false god is stopped because of what Pinchas did. We'll come back to that. We learn at the start of this week's Torah portion, Parshat Pinchas, that God makes a brit shalom with Pinchas, a covenant of peace. It's telling that the covenant that God makes with Pinchas is called a brit shalom, a covenant of peace, after Pinchas does such a violent act in pursuit of justice. Rabbi Jonathan Sachs, Zichrono Livracha, the former chief rabbi of the United Kingdom, explains that whether or not Pinchas's act was justified, God is communicating to Pinchas through such a covenant of peace that Pinchas will never again have to act so violently to pursue justice. Rabbi Sachs also points out that Pinchas gave his name to the parsha in which Moses asks God to appoint a successor for when Moses is gone to lead the Israelite people. Rabbi Menachem Mendel, the Rabbi of Kotsk, asks why Pinchas, hero of the hour, is not appointed as successor to Moses instead of Joshua. The Rebbe of Kotsk answers that a zealot cannot be a leader. It's dangerous, potentially, to have someone put in a position of power when they pursue justice in such a violent way. A leader, the person we're looking for to be put in that position of power, of leadership over the people of Israel, is someone that we need to know has patience, has forbearance, and respect for due process. So, while Pinchas acted in a way that he thought was in pursuit of justice, and he's right, what they were doing was wrong, but the way he handled it cost him the position of being the next leader of the Israelites after Moses would die, which must make us wonder, was what Pinchas did actually just? Or was it a misguided act of zealotry? Perhaps this event of God stopping the plague has maybe a little bit of a different explanation than what we initially might have thought of it. Perhaps God stops the plague because, seeing what Pinchas did, God realizes that it's time to stop the violence, both the divine and the human violence, that is not necessarily the best way, and it is certainly not the only way to seek justice. And so Joshua is put in a position of power to be the next leader of the Israelites rather than Pinchas. The second strong example of our ancestors pursuing justice in Parashat Pinchas is the story of the daughters of Zelophehad. So we might be familiar with this story, but just so that we all remember it, Zelophehad's daughters, Machla, Noah, Chogla, Milcah, and Tirzah, have no brothers, and the Israelites are getting ready to enter into the promised land, and they're dividing how the land will divide up among the Israelite families. And Zelophehad had died earlier in the wilderness, and so the question comes up of who is Zelophehad's land portion going to go to. So Zelophehad's daughters come to Moses so that they each can get a portion of what would have been passed down to Zelophehad's son had he had a son. Moses does not know what to do. There's no precedent for this. It's always passed down to the sons. So Moses goes to God and asks, what should I do here? And God says, yes, Ken. The plea of Zelophehad's daughters is just. In what was, of course, a patriarchal society, the society of the Torah certainly was, Zelophehad's daughters come to Moses in pursuit of justice. And Moses goes to God, and God affirms that justice. Justice to continue Zelophehad's name and legacy, and Zelophehad's daughters are looking for justice for themselves as women, as daughters of their father. Not only does God agree that it is just for Zelophehad's daughters to get what they asked for, God also sets that as a general rule in future similar cases, that if there are no sons, that the land should pass down to the daughters. So it's not only justice for Zelophehad's daughters, it's justice for future generations where this may happen. In a collection of modern Israeli women's midrash called Dirshuni, a collection that I love, Rivka Lubitch writes of a character named Tanot who asks God the following: if Zelophehad's daughters spoke the truth, why didn't you write that in your Torah in the first place? For after all, you, God, are truth, and your Torah is truth, and your word endures forever. God answers with a line from the book of Psalms, as God does, truth will grow from the ground. Tanot asks, but is it not also written in the book of Psalms, God's Torah is whole? God answers her, I already wrote in my Torah, be wholehearted with God, your Lord, and what's more, I wrote, walk before me and be wholehearted. There is truth that descends from on high, and there is truth that grows from below. Blessed is the generation in which truth from above meets truth from below. And this is what is meant in the book of Psalms when it says, truth will grow from the ground and justice look down from heaven. In Lubitch's interpretation of the text, we are in the best position to pursue justice when we remember that we are in an active partnership with God. We have a responsibility to stand up for what is right, and as Jews, when we do that in line with the values of our tradition, when we do that in line with the values of our holy text, when we do that in line with the values that God has given us, then we will be on the right path towards justice. And so we learn from the example of Pinhas that perhaps when fighting for justice, violence is not the best or only way to handle it. And we see in the pursuit of justice by Zelophehad's daughters a legacy of courage, advocacy, and transformation. This is one of the Torah's quiet revolutions. When truth is spoken, our job is to listen, and then to change course if necessary, to be sure we're on a path towards justice aligned with God, aligned with godliness. In every generation, there are those who speak up for justice, quietly, bravely, and with love. Sometimes they are the daughters of Zelophehad. Sometimes they are, like Pinchas, perhaps a little misguided, but still pursuing a just society. And sometimes they are victims of anti-Semitism, like Lucille and Leo Frank, and like that governor who was trying to find out the truth. Our job as Jews is not only to listen, but to respond, to say, yes, their plea is just, and then to act justly. Ken Yehi Ratzon, may it be so. Shabbat Shalom. The Torah reading for Pinchas begins on page 918.